If we look at history, the biggest skydiving accident happened because of a very small mistake. The realization of this mistake only came when 18 skydivers had already jumped from the plane, and now there was no way back. After jumping from the plane, the excitement of all 18 skydivers turned into fear. All of them were experienced skydivers, but unfortunately their years of experience couldn't help them here. In this accident, 16 skydivers lost their lives, and the story told by the two survivors made everyone's hair stand on end. Once again, welcome to our new video. Viewers, this accident is remembered today by the world as the Lake Erie disaster. Lake Erie, located in the state of Ohio, is North America's 4th largest and the world's 11th largest lake. To the south of Lake Erie, about 13 kilometers away, there is a small airfield called Outern Airport. On August 27, 1967, 30 skydivers arrived at this airport because they had been offered a free flight. A B-25 bomber plane, which had been used during World War II and later modified by a private company, was the plane offering this free flight to the skydivers. When the skydivers started boarding one by one, space inside the B-25 bomber became short, and because of the risk of overweight, the pilot at the last moment selected only 20 divers. The selection was based on the experience and level of the divers. The 10 skydivers who were not selected felt disappointed, but little did they know that the pilot's decision would save their lives. The plan was that the B-25 bomber would take off from Outern Airport, circle upward to reach 20,000 feet, and then drop 18 divers over the same airport. After that, it would climb higher and the last 2 divers would jump from an altitude of 30,000 feet. All the divers were supposed to land back at Outern Airport with the help of parachutes. Because of bad weather, the flight couldn't take off in the morning, but at 3 p.m., the B-25 bomber finally took off. All the divers sitting inside were extremely excited because firstly, they were getting a free flight, and secondly, it was their first experience jumping from a bomber plane. After the B-25 took off, a small Cessna 180 also took off from the same airport. This plane was supposed to stay at 12,000 feet and capture the skydivers' jumps on camera. Meanwhile, the B-25 carrying the divers kept spiraling upward. Due to the bad weather, both pilots were in contact with the nearest air traffic control tower, which was guiding them with their positions. Finally, after an hour, the B-25 bomber reached an altitude of 20,000 feet. The pilot radioed the control tower to ask for his location. At that time, GPS technology did not exist, so in bad weather, pilots had to rely on the control tower for guidance. The control tower told the B-25 pilot that he was 9 kilometers away from Outern Airport. According to the map, this meant he was now close to the drop zone. Exactly 1 minute later, the Cessna 180 pilot also contacted the air traffic controller to confirm his position in relation to the B-25, because the bad weather made it impossible for him to see it. The controller told the Cessna pilot that he was 9 kilometers behind the B-25. So on the map, if the B-25 was 9 kilometers away from Outern Airfield, then the Cessna was 9 kilometers behind the B-25, and therefore 18 kilometers away from Outern Airport. A few minutes later, at 20,000 feet, the B-25 pilot again asked for his location. This time, the controller told him that he was right above Outern Airport. At that point, the pilot gave the signal for 18 skydivers to jump. The small mistake that was about to cost the skydivers their lives had already happened, but for now, nobody knew. At this altitude, the temperature was minus 30 degrees Celsius, so all the divers had worn extra layers of jumpsuits. All the skydivers jumped together from the B-25 so they could form their formation during freefall. From that height, they could see a layer of clouds beneath them, and they planned to deploy their parachutes after passing through the clouds. They started enjoying their freefall, but as soon as they passed through the thick cloud layer, their excitement suddenly turned into fear. What they saw below was not land, but the deep waters of Lake Erie stretching as far as the eye could see. At that moment, their altitude was about 3,000 feet, and all of them quickly deployed their parachutes, hoping that somehow they might land close to the lake's edge near land. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. The spot where they landed in the water was at least 10 kilometers away from land. They thought that after landing in the water, they would quickly unbuckle their harnesses, swim, and wait for help. But things didn't go as they imagined. The heavy layers of warm clothing they had worn made it impossible for them to float on the water. Among them, only 2 divers had removed their shoes and extra weight before landing. These 2 divers managed to float for some time and were later rescued. Sadly, the remaining 16 divers did not survive. Their bodies were not seen for several days, and the last body was recovered after a week. This accident made headlines all over the world, and an investigation team was formed to find out the real cause behind it. The main question was, where exactly had the B-25 dropped the divers and whose mistake was it? The air traffic controller claimed that at the time the B-25 dropped the divers, it was above Outerne Airport, 10 kilometers inland from Lake Erie. They believed strong winds had drifted the skydivers into the lake. It was possible that the skydivers had indeed drifted over Lake Erie. But if for a second we accept the ATC's version, then that would mean the winds had carried the divers a total of 20 kilometers. 10 kilometers from Outerne Airport to Lake Erie, and another 10 kilometers further inside the lake. When experts calculated the wind speed of that day along with the jump altitude, they concluded that the divers could have drifted no more than 5 kilometers, which meant there was definitely something wrong with the ATC's statement. That was the ATC's claim, but the pilots of the B-25 and the Cessna insisted that they had been given the wrong location. Eventually, the investigation revealed that at the very moment when both pilots asked ATC for their positions, there had been a shift change among the controllers, and the second controller mistakenly gave the B-25 the location of the Cessna. In other words, when the B-25 pilot was told he was above Outerne Airport, in reality, the Cessna 180 was above the airport, and the B-25 was above Lake Erie. In addition, the divers and the pilot had made the mistake of jumping without visually confirming the target, which was against aviation laws. In memory of the 16 divers, for the next 2 years, other skydivers deliberately wore floating equipment and landed themselves into Lake Erie. In 1972, the court held the Federal Aviation Authority responsible for the deaths of the 16 divers and permanently suspended the B-25 pilot's license. Moreover, a rule was made for skydivers that they must always remain at least 50 kilometers away from any body of water.